The Crimson Path. Joseph Stalin's Journey from Revolutionary to Red Tsar. Read and published by Mr. Books. History is frequently told in bright bursts of triumph or crushing collapses. Yet the journey of Joseph Stalin, from the sun-bleached cobblestones of a humble Georgian town to the marble halls of absolute power in Moscow, defies such simple binaries. His life was a tale woven in crimson-hued stories of struggle, soaked in both hope and dread, crowned by victories that bled into tragedies for millions. To walk the path Stalin traversed is to enter the beating heart of 20th century revolution, ambition, and terror. This book explores not merely the chronological march of events that hoisted Stalin to unparalleled heights, but the psychological, emotional, and moral hurricanes that raged within and around him. Long before the world recognized him as the Red Tsar, godlike figure directing the fates of empire, Stalin was just Iosif Vissarionovich Juvishvili, a boy with brilliance and bruises shaped by poverty, faith, and betrayal. His earliest days in Gori sowed the seeds of resentment against oppression, kindling the flames of a revolution within. Merged into the pulsating bloodstream of Bolshevism, Stalin learned the art of survival, honing skills in secrecy, manipulation, and ruthless efficiency. He lacked the soaring rhetoric of Trotsky or the intellectual majesty of Lenin, yet his gift was dangerous. Resilience laced with patience, a relentless capacity for calculation, and an intuition for fear and loyalty. In smoke-filled rooms and icy Siberian exiles, he plotted, forged, and waited as revolutions convulsed the Russian Empire. Stalin's role transformed from a background operator to an indispensable cog, a master of logistics, discipline, and silent, swift action. His rise was not the consequence of a single defining explosion, but of countless infiltrations, betrayals, and alliances. Each chapter of his ascension entwines tightly with the tragedies and triumphs of a motherland in agony. Yet, Stalin's journey did not merely affect his own life. It redrew the maps of power, hope, and terror for an entire world. The shadows he cast stretched from Moscow to Madrid, from gulags to the gleaming Kremlin. His story is not only the chronicle of a man, but the story of how an idea fired by vision, violence, and vengeance can seduce, reshape, and destroy. Crimson Path invites you to walk alongside Joseph Stalin. Witness the forging of a revolutionary. Feel the icy winds that bit through Siberian exile. Enter the labyrinth of Soviet intrigue. See friends become foes, and watch as the man behind the myth brands history with iron and blood. This is the story not only of how power is seized, but of how it takes hold of the soul. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Shadows of Gori, Beginnings of a Rebel. The story of Joseph Stalin starts not in the marble halls of Moscow, but in a cramped room within a rickety house in Gori, Georgia, a town more known for its ancient fortresses than the birth of a future tyrant. Born on a storm-lashed night. In December 1878, Iosif Vissarionovich Juvishvili entered a world marked by struggle and survival. The steely cold winds and stony paths of Gori would forge resilience into his young soul, laying the first bricks on the crimson path he would tread. His father, Vissarion, a cobbler by trade, was a man broken by hardship. Alcohol's grip tightened around him, and he lurched through life with violence and disappointment. Young Iosif felt the weight of his father's rage in bruises and fear, a lesson in power and cruelty that took root deep in his heart. His mother, Kedavin, a devout Christian with iron resolve, became the fortress shielding his childhood from the worst of life's tempests. Her dreams for her son soared far beyond what fate had offered. She envisioned the priesthood, an escape, From Gory's dusty misery, education became both solace and battleground. The church school, a tiny building echoing with chants and the crack of canes, was where young Iosif's mind first kindled its fire. He became known for his intelligence, a quick wit that cut sharper than any blade. In the hallowed shadows of candlelit classrooms, a different fire grew, a slow-burning resentment for authority that crushed the weak and praised the strong. Scholarship propelled him to the Tiflis Seminary, a place where boys wore the mask of piety but nurtured rebellion behind furtive glances. Here, the son of the cobbler became Soso, the insurgent. The rigid, autocratic rule of the Russian Orthodox seminary, its endless recitations, its disdain for all things Georgian seared his soul. It was within the walls intended to sanctify that a revolution began. Books illegal, thick with radical ideas, began to circulate among the restless students. Here, the words of Marx and Engels arrived like forbidden fruit. Soso, drawn to the whispers of liberation and equality, inhaled the promise of a new world. His friends would later recall the intensity in his eyes as he read, furiously scribbling notes, transforming theory into belief. The brutality of imperial rule in the Caucasus, the daily injustices he witnessed, these became fuel for his growing anger. But awakening to injustice is a dangerous thing. The seminary authorities noticed the fever among their students. Soso was repeatedly punished. Suspicion clung to him like a second skin. Soon, his rebellious heart could no longer fit within the seminary's suffocating discipline. He was expelled officially for insubordination, but truly for daring to dream of a world overturned. Returning to Gory was not a defeat, it was a turning point. With nothing to lose and everything to prove, Soso joined the swelling ranks of Georgian revolutionaries. He attended clandestine meetings, learning the art of subterfuge, the dance of trust and betrayal. In the Warren-like backstreets, he first tasted the intoxicating promise of power to change the order that had crushed his childhood. Those early years, marked by poverty, violence, and restless hope, would shape Stalin's soul. The lessons of Gory were etched into every decision he would later make. Strength flows from struggle, loyalty is rare, and every heart harbors the seeds of rebellion. The world had no inkling that the bruised boy with fire in his eyes would, in time, become the Red Tsar, but the road had begun crimson and unyielding. Chapter 2. Awakening the Revolution. Joining the Bolshevik cause. Returning from the ashes of his formal education, Stalin found himself in the heart of a storm building across the Russian Empire. The dawn of the 20th century brought unrest and hope in equal measure. Everywhere, whispers of revolution threaded through the alleys and bazaars of Georgia, igniting hearts hungering for change. Soso, adopting myriad aliases as protection against the ever-watchful Okhrana, threw himself into the turbulence. The world he entered was unforgiving. Russian rule weighed heavily on the Caucasus. Oppression was daily bread, arbitrary arrests, censorship, and the silent terror of informants. Yet in this crucible, resistance flourished. The new gospel delivered by Marx, and now championed by Lenin's pamphlets, promised an end to these ancient chains. For the fiery young Stalin, the movement was less an ideology and more a calling. Secret cells sprouted in Tiflis and Batumi. Stalin became both pupil and teacher, mastering the catechism of revolution. Trust no one fully, move swiftly, inspire fear when necessary. He spread pamphlets, organized strikes, and orchestrated daring attacks against the Tsarist apparatus. Not content to be a mere follower, he engineered bold actions, labor strikes that shuttered entire factories, bank heists that stuffed Bolshevik coffers with rubles. He earned a reputation as the mountain man, resolute, fearless, and utterly merciless. Stalin's nemesis loomed in the form of the Okhrana, the Tsar's secret police. They stalked and infiltrated revolutionary circles with ruthless efficiency. Arrest became a near certainty for serious agitators, and Stalin's luck ran dry in 1902. He was captured and exiled to Siberian ordeal designed to crush the will of insurgents. But Siberia, with its bleak snowscapes and endless distances, became another school for the future tyrant. The ordeal was bitter. Hunger gnawed, the cold bit through layers of rags, and loneliness closed around him like a fist. Yet Stalin endured. Escape was not only a fantasy, but a necessity. He effected it with a cunning that would come to define his career, tricking guards, bribing the right men, vanishing into the wild expanse of Russia's heartland, back in revolutionary circles. These exploits became legend. Stalin's ability to evade the Tsar's grasp made him a symbol of invincibility. Where others faltered, he grew more determined. His writings began to circulate not the grand theory of Lenin, but earthy, accessible calls to action. He spoke of striking back, of raising fists. Not just voices. It was this blend of action and pragmatism that drew the attention of powerful Bolsheviks. In 1905, as Russia convulsed in the throes of its first revolution, Stalin moved boldly through the chaos of strikes and street fights. Alliances with local strongmen and ink-stained intellectuals alike proved invaluable. A violence and hope of 1905 burned itself into his bones the lesson: revolutions are not won by words alone. Stalin emerged from this tempest hardened and elevated. Under various names, Koba, Ivanovich, Chizikov, he became a vital link between the Central Committee and the far-flung revolutionary outposts. The world of the Bolsheviks was fractious, split by ideology and ambition, but Stalin's loyalty to the movement and Lenin never wavered. As he moved through the underground, organizing, punishing defectors, recruiting new zealots, Stalin was slowly, silently carving his place in the future. He did not dazzle in debates or seduce with oratory. His genius lay in endurance, in the willingness to do what others feared. He was the hidden hand, the unglamorous executor of impossible tasks. The fire unleashed in these Georgian years did not fade, it exploded outward, consuming and transforming everything it touched. When the Russian Empire shook itself to pieces in 1917, Stalin was ready, not as a philosopher king, but as a survivor, a master of revolution's darker arts. The Crimson Path was now wide open, stretching from the back alleys of Batumi to the thunderous heart of Moscow. Chapter 3. The Forger of Fates. Stalin amidst war and revolution. The world convulsed in 1914 as the thunder of war rolled from the trenches of France to the snowy steppes of Russia. For Joseph Stalin, the cacophony of global conflict was both opportunity and ordeal. The old world was dying, and amidst its ruins, revolutions would be born. The Bolshevik dream of a proletarian uprising, once distant, now shimmered on the horizon. From the outset of the Great War, Stalin operated like a shadow. He wrote persuasive articles for Pravda, orchestrated clandestine meetings, and ensured lines of communication between scattered Bolshevik factions. In the furnace of battle, he learned to wield fear and loyalty in equal measure. When the Tsar's empire imploded under the twin weights of military disaster and civil strife, Stalin stood poised to seize the moment. The February Revolution of 1917 shattered the old order. Spontaneous uprisings and mass demonstrations forced the abdication of Nicholas II. The heart of Russia pulsed with euphoria and uncertainty. The country brimmed with councils, Soviets, each vying for influence in the vacuum left behind. Bolsheviks moved swiftly, exploiting chaos with practiced hands. Stalin returned from exile, his gaze sharper, his manner more formidable. He quickly aligned himself with Lenin, who recognized in him a dependable executor. While others debated theory and strategy, Stalin acted. He took charge of the crucial Petrograd Bureau, organizing the city's workers and soldiers. His methods were pragmatic, sometimes brutal, arresting opponents, shutting down rival newspapers, tightening Bolshevik control brick by brick. Throughout 1917, as two governments, provisional and Soviet, contested for Russia's soul, Stalin solidified his reputation. He was not the star speaker or the charismatic rallying point. Instead, he was the architect of logistics and order, a fixer when revolution teetered on chaos. His fingerprints were indelibly marked on decisions that would tilt Russia toward Bolshevism and civil war. October dawned with a whisper, then roared. The Bolsheviks staged their fateful coup, storming the Winter Palace. Stalin was there, not as a figurehead, but as a linchpin. His steady hand orchestrated key strikes against loyalist holdouts, ensuring a relatively bloodless yet decisive transfer of power. The world was rocked by the news. The world's largest empire now belonged to the proletariat. It was then that Russia's great ordeal began. Civil war erupted, reds against whites, a typhoon of violence and shifting loyalties. Stalin moved from front to front, a relentless commissar, enforcing discipline with iron will. In Tsaritsyn, later renamed Stalingrad, he showed what lengths he'd go to secure victory. Ruthless, unsparing, he authorized executions and repressions to maintain Bolshevik control. Friends and enemies alike learned to fear his wrath. Even Leon Trotsky trembled at his rise. Victory in civil war came not by brilliance at the table, but by savagery in the streets, in fields thick with blood and grief. The Russia that emerged was battered, disillusioned, yet strangely reborn. Stalin, forged in battle, was now indispensable to Lenin, not an equal, perhaps, but an irreplaceable right arm. This period was the crucible of Stalin's political soul. It taught him that power was not an idea, but a living, breathing force assembled from scraps, wielded without pity. The skills he gained as a warlord and organizer became the foundation of his future rule. Nothing would be given freely. Everything must be seized, held, enforced. As the Civil War's fires cooled, Stalin stood at the threshold of new, greater struggles. The road ahead bristled with rivals and dangers, but his capacity for endurance and secrecy would now be matched with something else. A taste of absolute power under red banners, which sang to his heart in a language both terrible and familiar. The forger of fates was awakened. The world would never be the same. Chapter 4. Allies and Adversaries. Navigating Lenin's Inner Circle. Victory in revolution seldom brings unity. Instead, it unveils the fierce competition lurking beneath slogans and shared dreams. With Russia's fate now in Bolshevik hands, the true battleground shifted from streets and trenches to the smoke-laden corridors of the Kremlin. It was here, amid endless debates and backroom intrigue, that Stalin, the outsider from Georgia, would wage his most risky war yet, the struggle for power among Lenin's chosen. The new Soviet government was a tempest of idealists, visionaries, and fanatics. Trotsky, the silver-tongued orator, architect of the Red Army, glimmered with charisma and intellectual fire. Zinoviev and Kamenev, seasoned revolutionaries, wielded veteran status and cunning. Rykov and Bukharin, dogged by debates between left and right, shaped conflicting visions for Russia's future. Amidst these titans, Stalin appeared unremarkable. Taciturn, often overlooked, he held minor offices. Commissar of Nationalities, then General Secretary of the party. His power lay not in speeches, but in the silent levers of bureaucracy. As General Secretary, Stalin quietly restructured the party's machinery, promoting allies, assigning loyalists to critical posts, and stockpiling dossiers on friends and foes. Every appointment is a brick, every secret a weapon. Lenin's health began to fail, casting a long, chilling shadow. Each member of the Politburo sensed history's wheel turning. The competition grew venomous. Stalin exploited divisions, posing as a peacemaker to some, a confidant to others. He took tea with Zinoviev, conspired with Kamenev, and assured Trotsky of friendship each partnership, a temporary alliance masking a deeper rivalry. He wielded patience like a blade. Where others clamored for Lenin's ear, Stalin listened, memorizing every slight, cataloging every ambition. He weaved networks of information, employing his people in key regions, weaving a net across the vast party apparatus. He absorbed the lessons of earlier betrayals, never showing his full hand, seldom revealing a motive. Lenin, ever prescient, grew wary. He criticized Stalin's growing arrogance, even penning the famous testament, warning of his comrade's dangerous temperament. But Lenin's voice, once thunder, was fading. In meetings, Stalin masked disappointment with feigned humility. Outside, he marshaled allies to quash opposition, dismissing threats with ruthless efficiency. Within the tempest, old friendships curdled. Trotsky, the idealist, failed to grasp the potency of Stalin's silent accumulations. Kamenev and Zinoviev grew complacent. Through it all, Stalin remained the quiet, relentless center of force, gathering strength just below the surface. The transformation was nearly invisible. Where once he had been the fixer, the enforcer, he was now the architect of a new order. One brick and betrayal at a time. In these fevered years, Stalin discovered the intoxicating taste of intrigue. Power was not seized by the clash of armies, but by the patient threading of influence, one nod, one file, one friendship at a time. The corridors of power were more lethal than any battlefield, yet Stalin thrived where others faltered. Foes would soon learn that survival in the Soviet hierarchy demanded not only ideology and loyalty, but a willingness to sacrifice everything, even one's soul. Amidst the swirl of allies and adversaries, a new truth emerged. The revolution had devoured its fathers, and the son most cunning would inherit the world they built. Chapter 5. The Death of Lenin. Seizing the Moment. The decline and eventual death of Lenin in January 1924 marked the end of one era and the convulsive birth of another. To millions across Russia, Lenin was more than a leader. He was the voice of revolution, the father of a new age. His death unleashed a tempest of grief and uncertainty. But for those ensconced in the Kremlin's labyrinth, it was the opening of the final, lethal act in the struggle for absolute power. Stalin mourned in public, standing among the throngs who filed past Lenin's body, tears stiffening on his cheeks. Yet beneath the condemnation and sorrow, his heart pounded with febrile calculation. With Lenin's last breath, the checks imposed on ambition vanished. The Soviet Union was now an empire without a center, its future waiting to be seized. Funeral became a stage. Trotsky, Stalin's chief rival, could not attend, misled by Stalin himself, who offered false information about the date. As Lenin's body was encased in marble and myth, Stalin stepped forward, his silhouette backlit by crimson banners. He presented himself as the humble steward of Lenin's legacy, the patient disciple who would guard the revolution from its enemies. But the aftermath was anything but humble. Stalin moved with ferocity, building coalitions and then breaking them as needed. First, he allied with Zinoviev and Kamenev to isolate Trotsky, accusing him of factionalism and dishonoring Lenin's memory. Once Trotsky was weakened, Stalin pivoted, denouncing Zinoviev and Kamenev, exiling them from the party's highest echelons. Through it all, Stalin played the role of mediator, reassuring the party of unity, promising to fulfill Lenin's vision, while deftly crushing dissent. Every coup was executed not with grand speeches, but with whispered orders, midnight meetings, reassignments to Siberia, or the grave. Rivals found their alliances crumbling, their supporters vanishing, their legacy fading into silence. The Politburo, once the collective brain of the revolution, became an arena of subterfuge and fear. With each passing month, Stalin's grip tightened. He expanded his powers as general secretary, infusing the bureaucracy with loyalists. Investigations, purges, and denunciations turned the party inward, splintering solidarity and feeding paranoia. Yet, for all the calculation, this period bore deep wounds. Stalin's vision of power was shaped by trauma, a childhood of fear, the brutal lessons of war, betrayal by supposed comrades. Each step forward bore the shadow of loneliness, trust traded for control. In seizing Lenin's mantle, Stalin did not inherit a kingdom of peace, but a world of ghosts, each with their own demands and debts. The death of Lenin did not end the revolution. It delivered it into the hands of a man who believed only in vigilance, in struggle without end. Stalin's reign was not an accident of succession, but the outcome of a lifetime's lessons. Loyalty is always conditional. Friends may be deadlier than foes, and power is the truest, cruelest master of all. Chapter 6. Purge by Fire. The Ordeal of Consolidation. The quiet terror of Moscow's streets in the mid-1930s was not born of thunder, but of whispers. Behind every closed door, the air seemed charged with static, as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for a knock that would mean the end. Stalin, now at the helm of a nation scrambling into modernity, saw enemies lurking behind every fluted column of the Kremlin, every flicker in the eyes of men who once called him Comrade. In the aftermath of Lenin's death, Stalin had maneuvered through the shrill cacophony of party infighting with lethal precision. But as his authority cemented, another challenge loomed not from without, but from within. The old Bolsheviks, those grizzled revolutionaries of 1917, remained. They remembered a time when Stalin was a deliverman, a fixer, not the Red Tsar. Their loyalty to Lenin's ghost was dangerous. Their legend, even more so. Thus began the purge by fire. The pretext was tragic: the assassination of Sergei Kirov, a rising star, in December 1934. The murder set off a volcanic eruption. Writing no evidence, Stalin declared the party riddled, with traitors and spies, echoes of his private paranoia. Overnight, lists were drafted. Names were checked and checked again, sometimes for old grudges, sometimes for sheer convenience. The machinery of the NKVD spun into feverish overdrive, arresting, interrogating, torturing not only officials, but artists, engineers, wives, even children. Trials became theater. Old Bolsheviks dragged before glaring lights, faces sunken, denouncing themselves and each other with desperation fed by months of torture. In Moscow's black-walled courtrooms, men who had once stormed the Winter Palace confessed to treacheries they had never imagined. In the audience, Stalin's ice-blue gaze seemed to bore into the future, chilling every heart. Outside the city, learned silence. Friends avoided friends. Wives wept in secret. Brave poets destroyed their works at dusk. The camp system gulags metastasized across Siberia and beyond, catching not just the guilty, but anyone brushed by suspicion. Stalin, meanwhile, moved methodically, pruning rivals, altering the party's very DNA. By 1938, the old guard, the living memory of the revolution, was nearly eradicated. Yet throughout the orgy of confession and accusation, Stalin's portrait grew ever larger. Banished was the shadowy functionary. In his place, the people saw a man both savior and judge. Fear and worship entwined. Consolidation by terror was Stalin's crucible and his masterpiece. Fire not only destroys, it purifies, leaving the surface charred, but a new order layered underneath. A Russia remade in Stalin's likeness, red as the blood that had paved every inch of the path so far. Chapter 7. The Architect of Fear. The Great Terror Unleashed. The year was 1937. Moscow's chill was unrelenting, but it paled beside the frost, crawling through men's veins as the Great Terror reached its crescendo. No part of society was exempt. No one could predict whose turn would come next. The mathematician, correcting a colleague's error, a peasant in a remote village, a celebrated general. Stalin's order reverberated down to the lowest levels. Unmask the enemies. Root out the fifth columnists. Be vigilant or be damned. Stalin directed it all from the sanctum of the Kremlin, mastering not just the machinery, but the psychology of fear. Orders for arrest or execution bore his signature's flourish, a looping, inevitable scrawl. The NKVD, emboldened and terrified in equal measure, constructed quotas for death and imprisonment, hunting saboteurs as if the air itself were conspiring. No statistic could encapsulate the sense of dread of families torn at midnight, of sudden absences noticed by trembling neighbors. This was no chaos. It was calculus. The atmosphere of relentless vigilance was itself a weapon, battering citizens into submission. In the factories and fields, the specter of denunciation broke backs and spirits. Workers produced like machines, then turned on one another to survive. Neighborhoods became mazes of secrets, where a careless word could mean oblivion. Trust, the scaffolding of society, withered dot in the army. The terror was worse. Stalin, ever fearing coups, did not spare the military's heart. Marshals, colonels, heroes of the Civil War, dragged to Lubyanka, interrogated, vanished. The Soviet Union, once a nation of believers, now became a nation of prisoners and informers. Its arteries pulsed not just with industry, but with suspicion. Outside, the walls of power, artists and writers reeled in horror. Some disappeared, others renounced their creations, painting Stalin as a father and deliverer, even as he crushed their voices into the dust. The air itself learned to flatter him. Deep inside, amid the murders and betrayals, a new national mythology was forged, one that cast the Red Tsar as benevolent architect, even as he orchestrated the devouring of his children. For Stalin, the Great Terror was never senseless madness. It was the ultimate test of will, an act of recreation. He believed that only through the annihilation of doubt and dissent could utopia, his utopia, be built. When the blood tide receded, the world beheld the Soviet Union transformed, its ancient spirit beaten into a singular image. Stalin's face, eyes cold and unreadable, gazing out over a nation never more united and never more afraid. Chapter 8. Red Tsar Ascendant. The apex of Stalin's power. By the dawn of the 1940s, the smoke of purges still lingered in Moscow, but Stalin stood unchallenged, a colossus astride a new kind of empire. His portrait, wreathed in banners of red and gold, presided over parades that snaked through the city. Workers and soldiers cheered, but in their cheers, you could hear the echo of compulsion, of longing, of exhaustion. The architect of terror was now master of stability. The Red Tsar had ascended. The Soviet Union, remade through a crucible of blood, roared with secret industrial might. Cities once bruised by civil war and famine buzzed with new construction steel girders rising, railroads slashing the tundra, colossal factories belching smoke. Stalin's plans promised a radiant future, and every achievement was credited to his unyielding genius. His cult swelled. Children learned his life as scripture. Artists laboriously depicted him as the wise father. The air itself seemed saturated with doctrine, yet behind the facade, the nation bled in silence. Millions lived in the shadows of loss. The gulags overflowed. The survivors shuffled their wounds in silence, building the edifice of the new world with hands numbed by old grief. Stalin saw both suffering and achievement as twin pillars of his rule. every sacrifice necessary, every step forward paved. With bones internationally, the Red Tsar's grip was iron. Spies and agents radiated from Moscow, stoking new revolutions or undermining old regimes. Stalin played Western democracies and Nazi Germany off each other, a master tactician never revealing the cards he had already marked. When, in 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact threw the world into disbelief, it was proof, if proof were needed, of Stalin's cunning and pitiless pragmatism. Beneath the banners and military parades, however, was a mind never at peace. Stalin trusted none and kept all at arm's length. He dined late, a solitary shadow discussing matters of life and death with the last men he had not yet destroyed. The nation watched his every move, swung between adulation and terror. At the apex of power, Stalin gazed out not just at the Soviet Union, but at a world he meant to shape. He had become the state, the law, the hope, and the horror intertwined. The crimson path, once bloodied by his struggle, had now become the only road. Forward for millions, a saga of scars and dreams, of empire and fear, written in letters red as the dawn over the Kremlin. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy.